Welcome to episode 3 of Astrology Now, Crucial Insights for Critical Times. Today's episode will focus upon Jupiter entering Pisces. This is a very special event in that Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces. This can only really occur every 12 years. Well, technically it's 11.86 years for the cycle of Jupiter around the Sun, and it's measured the same for us on Earth. So Jupiter entering Pisces on May 13th, 2021 is a very special event. Now, what it will do is enter Pisces for a 10-week period this time, because what happens is, due to retrogrades, the factor that's produced by virtue of the Earth orbiting the Sun and the planets appearing to reverse order of direction, they reverse direction, subject to an optical illusion. But interestingly enough, that optical illusion has a psychological effect upon us. It may be because basically that this has been occurring since the beginning of the solar system, in as much as the planets were where they were, etc. So long before, at least, human life on this planet arrived, the planetary order has been underway. So there's been this phenomenon, but the human factor is very important. We are the psychological sentient beings who bring forward a co-creative factor. We are not simply in nature, we are an extension of it. We are a co-creating participant in nature, and modern science has proven that. It's very important to know that. Basically, that was proven and is still to this day upheld by what's called the double slit experiment, which I'll leave you to go find under quantum physics, for example, the double slit, S-L-I-T experiment, which is really interesting, referring to phenomenon of light producing wave and particle principles subject to their observation. And that was a very important moment in time. Now, all of which is sort of a mystical theme to bring forward, but that is very much in keeping with Jupiter in Pisces. Pisces is the most mystical sign of the zodiac, where Aries is the newborn and representing all new initiatives, etc. And Aquarius is the elder, the old person or crone or wise one of the zodiac. Pisces can be understood as the life between lives, actually, the subconscious mind. And in that, there's a mystical story to be told. And it refers basically also to, as mentioned, our subconscious mind. So in our conscious awareness, which we refer to as our conscious mind, we have the subconscious to contend with, and examples such as the proverbial iceberg with the greater proportion of it beneath the surface, so that whatever we see as an iceberg in terms of the classical reference to the tip of the iceberg, we know that there's a great deal more mass beneath the surface of the water. So let's begin by looking at Jupiter Ingress Pisces and get a look at the whole chart and what that implies for us all over the coming 10 weeks. And as a foreshadow theme for the this is the official initial entry of Jupiter in Pisces, but due to it entering and then turning retrograde and then retreating back into Aquarius there in late July, but then it will re-enter Pisces practically the last day of the year. I think it's the 28th of December to be exact, when it will re-enter Pisces and resume its longer course. So it's interesting because its 11.86 year cycle is divided into a couple of portions, and that happens. So when it does enter Pisces again in late December, it won't be there for a full 11.86. Sorry, that's not correct. No, the 11.86 year cycle, and when I'm referring to Jupiter in a sign, it's a 1 year cycle, actually. Just getting those cycles mixed up a bit. Yes, the 11.86 year period is the orbit of the entire zodiac, a complete cycle, but the cycle through each sign is approximately 1 year. And so it's being divided, which is not uncommonly true, not always the case, but not uncommonly for the far planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, etc. And but it is occurring this time, so we get this little 10-week sneak preview, although it should be noted that when Jupiter does enter Pisces later in the year, it'll recreate a snapshot event. So I'm going to show you that as well. Okay, so let's begin. All right, so here we are looking at the chart of Jupiter. There it is, high in the chart in this case. Now we are still holding the sun close to, positioning the sun at the house cusp of the first, which is known as the ascendant, actually. And so the ascendant and all the equal houses are linked to the sun. Now I'm going to show you in a minute what it looks like with Jupiter there, and that's what I mentioned last time. You can put any planet on this point right here and look at the whole chart and get a very unique angle from its perspective. Call it subjective perspective. But the sun ever remains, sort of the CEO of the company, shall we say. As magnificent and wonderful as Jupiter is, indeed, Zeus, in fact, no less. Jupiter is Zeus in the pantheon of Greek mythology. And the fact that Jupiter is so massive, it's larger than all the planets and all the moons in the solar system combined. That's how big Jupiter is. It's really that sometimes kind of, it actually gives off heat as well. So it's kind of almost like a sun. It hasn't gone into a nuclear fusion process, which is the birth of suns according to modern cosmology, but it is still hot. And that's something to consider way out there in space. Venus, too, is hot, and hot as hell, as the saying goes, but we'll leave Venus alone for now. But what is significant to note is that even though Jupiter's that large, it's small still in comparison to the sun. And it's a little interesting note to add here very quickly on this perspective, that the sun is literally 99.99, apparently, or at least 99.9% the mass of the entire solar system. So think about that for a moment. Jupiter's larger than all the planets and moons in the entire solar system combined, but the sun comprises 99.9 at least percent of the entire mass of the solar system. That is quite some statistic to consider, and when you really look and wonder about the sun, belittling it and diminishing it and so forth, which I have seen along the way be done, kind of to put the sun in the subordinate position, is kind of a sort of a silly thing to do, really. When you really get close to what exactly is being said, after all, we are looking at the solar system. So Jupiter entering shows basically what we're seeing is the alignment of planets. Now, initially, what we have been observing, and we're still paying attention to, is this bowl chart, and there's Mars, there's Pluto on the other side, and so we have the emerging exactitude of that bowl. But again, we're going to talk about that next time. But it is a feature of the entire or whole chart. You have to always keep that in mind as I continue to say. So now when we see that, we say, Jupiter's ingress into Pisces is encompassed by a bowl chart with Pluto at the cutting edge and Mars at the trailing edge, and that's very, very significant. Bowl chart principles are very self-contained. In a natal chart, the person would be very self-contained and very experience-oriented, by the way, in one manner or another, and all depending on the order of the planets and etc. and all the finer details. Now, in this chart, we can look at many things like where's the sun and where's the phase of the moon is a very significant consideration all the time as well in astrology. So the moon is still new. It's about it's 24 degrees ahead of the sun. So that's almost exactly 2 days, just as we did the new moon chart, which was May 11th. This is May 13th. So sure enough, a tidy 2 days after there's this Jupiter ingress into Pisces, and it's occurring during a new moon. And that phase of the moon is a really, you might call that particular degree of the moon to be very passionate. When we're still in the new moon phase, the impulse of, say you were born during a new moon within the first 30 degrees, it gives you a very ardent passion for life. There's a sense of kind of unequivocal desire to go for whatever it is you are interested in. At worst, though, you may do that without due consideration of others. It can be seen as something of a self-centered principle at worst. So there's the lessons of the brand new moon is to learn that there are others to consider and to, identify with both one's own and other people's sense of individuality and all the courtesies of respect and acknowledgement and recognition that ideally come with that. Now, what we are also seeing here is a grouping of planets. You might have noticed this already. Venus, North Node, Mercury, and the Moon, all in Gemini, even though a little bit loose by degree, generally forming a stellium, especially with the North Node here, the lunar North Node, kind of gluing Mercury and Venus together. So that's interesting all in its own, yes indeed. So the big Gemini factor supports, especially because the Sun still is in Taurus and Venus is the ruler of Taurus, it continues to play a major role in this chart. So even though we are looking at Jupiter in Pisces, and I'll get back to that, once again, we're looking at the whole chart to get an assessment of the moment it arrived, what else in the whole picture sense was going on. So that's where we're at. So we have that, still the anchor of the Sun in Taurus, and we can look at the decant and Dwad there, which remains in Capricorn, and by now, though, it has moved further from the Capricorn Dwad to be the Aquarius Dwad. So it's a sort of a continuation of themes I've been discussing, but it now swings the emphasis, still keeps the emphasis on Aquarius, which does include Saturn being there, but also swings it even stronger over to Uranus, which is the ruling planet for Aquarius, and it being in Taurus there emphasizes a very subtle but real shift over to that principle that we were discussing last time with the new moon in Taurus of changes in the economy and our needs to adapt to that. Now, the other factor worth looking at is that the fact that Jupiter is in Pisces, we ask, okay, if Jupiter is the traditional ruler for Pisces, what's the modern? And the answer to that is Neptune. Now, Neptune is itself in Pisces. That's very significant because it produces an emphasis upon, of course, the theme of Pisces. And now, because it is there at that particular degree, it just so happens that that exact degree where Pisces is sitting has a very strong Scorpio Sagittarius influence. Now, I emphasize Sagittarius in particular because it's the ruling sign for Jupiter, or Jupiter's the ruling planet for Sagittarius. It works sort of both ways. You can say it either which way. But more officially, the planet is the ruler of the sign. Now, so Jupiter in Pisces and disposited, what we call, whatever the ruling planet for that sign is, it's called the dispositor, in its own sign, gives Neptune a lot of weight in this whole chart. Okay, so Neptune suddenly takes on a whole added measure of weight. Now, on the high side, Neptune in Pisces is very much about higher ideals and spiritual aspirations, and it can go into the direction of mysticism, and all things of that nature, which, ideals, mysticism, spirituality, but on the downside, Neptune and Pisces can be full of illusions, deceptions, denials, escapism, etc. So it's hard to refute that some of that factor is quite possible. Also, where Jupiter can bring, especially in Pisces, what can be described as a euphoric kind of emotional appeal and feeling, very euphoric, it can also, in the negative, prove hysterical. So when I look at this chart, I ask myself, is there anything hysterical going on else in the chart that would support that? And it's his, when I say hysterical, I'm not talking funny. I'm talking about when if there's a hysterical response on a mass level, it's not a positive thing. It's like the rioting last summer, for example, in 2020 and other times in the year in the United States and elsewhere. That hysteria principle was emphasized, and it was coming from other factors, but they were linked to water signs at that time. And I'll leave that alone because that's behind us now. But just know that there's this hysteria possibility of Jupiter there. Now, Jupiter expands whatever it touches. It's known to be a benevolent, a positive factor, but it's not, again, that simple. You have to always look at the black and the white, both sides. All possibilities are there, especially given the fact that Jupiter is at 0 degrees in square to Venus. Now, squares are kind of edgy aspects. They tend to produce very kind of energies that cross purposes is the basic interpretation. It does so happen, though, when Jupiter square Venus can be positively understood because they're both known as beneficiaries or benevolence. Jupiter and Venus are like the prince and princess, where the sun and moon are like the king and queen, if you like. Okay, so they hold high rank in the court. So when they're in square, they aren't so difficult as other planets might be, in fact, and would be. The fact that Venus is ahead of Jupiter in that square helps in terms of it representing an expressive force, because the square aspect is fully charged with a strong urge for some form of expression. It does include problem solving as well due to the cross purposes principle, but due to Venus and the stellium in Gemini, it will, I am sure, produce a higher level of communication, a higher level of drama, especially because Venus is in the Dwad of Leo, and in that regard it produces, in the negative sense, what can be called drama. I mean, drama is not necessarily negative, but it can be exciting in the positive side, and there is that factor of fun that we can honor as well, Leo being the sign of games, fun, play, children, and all sort of lighter hearted activities, entertainments, and performances, etc. But Venus there can be a drama princess, shall we say, in the negative. But generally in Pisces and with the other Mercury, Moon, and North Node, she will contribute to dialogue, once again, as mentioned with the new moon in Taurus as well. So get ready for a lot of heated discussion, and things could well turn in the direction of more themes surrounding spirituality, psychology, and so forth, due to the water sign emphasis. Water signs rule psychology and, by extension, spirituality. After all, psychology, literally translated, is interpreted as the study of the soul, and more in terms of the whole mind. Modern psychology, at worst, has divorced itself in the mainstream from the soul. And that's a real tragedy and something that we need to reclaim, because it's sort of been usurped, I think, by a very materialistic model that it operates more on, synthetic drug manipulation of the brain, which I'm not saying doesn't work at all, and I'm not saying there's no value at all, but it, at worst, it loses sight. It's kind of a bit of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, losing sight of the soul aspect of life. And when we divorce ourselves from soul, we're in trouble, and that's partially why we're in trouble in the world. We've become anchored in a materialistic mire. It's a delusion. Materialism is a delusion. Really, modern science in the most advanced reaches, the better scientists, at least, who are more advanced than the average, would probably more often than not, although I haven't gone and interviewed them all, would agree, yes, the notion of a materialism has been overcome by new evidence. They can't put it this way: the materialistic paradigm is on shaky ground because it never has been able to finally prove its position as true. It's always been subject by science itself to be less than true. So to date, it's at least the jury is out, but evidence strongly leans to that. No, the notion of living in a materialistic universe is rather silly. What's woven within that is, by the way, the debate between consciousness, where it emerges from, which is basically, does existence or matter emerge from consciousness, or does consciousness emerge from matter? And the perennial spiritual notion and truth, I will say, is that matter comes from consciousness. The universe is on purpose. It's intentional, creative. It works by design. There's a plan. Astrology works by virtue of that principle. So that matter emerges from the divine mind makes a lot of sense, especially when we come close to the understanding that, according to quantum physics, the fact of the matter is there's no matter at the core of matter. It's an illusion. That's like the ancient mystics have told us many times. So why all of this discussion is very relevant is because Jupiter is in the mystical sign of Pisces. So if ever there was a time for us to enter into this dialogue, to remind ourselves that, yes, indeed, we do live in a conscious universe. Consciousness as a word is one that one has to be careful with, because if one kind of takes a linear and dogmatic approach to the etymology of a word, they may arrive at a notion of conclusion that, therefore, no, this argument is defeated because of the etymology, where in fact what would be required is a reinterpretation at an etymological, meaning the root of the word, the root meaning. So consciousness is not just, awareness of your cerebral cortex. After all, when we talk about the subconscious, the notion is that it's sometimes referred to as the unconscious, but there's nothing unconscious about the subconscious. It's the conscious mind, your waking consciousness that tends, yours, mine, and everybody's, that tends to be unconscious of it. Okay, so it's beneath the level. So calling it the unconscious was kind of a poor choice of words by Carl Jung, in my opinion. It's kind of like the 7-Up commercials from years ago, in comparison to Coke. They call it the Uncola. It's just not a great use of words. Okay, undo, undulate, if you like, under. The word applies along the way in the English language, but to refer to something as an and as to negate something isn't the best. So I'm just going to leave it right there. What we have here is a beautiful splash chart. This photo, this moment Jupiter entered Pisces reveals that the overall theme will include that bowl, which does include Pluto in Capricorn, which remains a very powerful theme of fairly powerful government control and authority and the vying for power. So sort of in a somewhat negative sense, we're going to continue to see heavy governmental authority taking, its opportunity to exercise itself. But that's a synchronicity. It's not just individuals who are making that choice. Always worth considering that carefully. And on the other hand, Mars, which is waxing towards that opposition with Pluto, but it's still not there, it has some degrees to go, but it shows that it's moving towards it, is a process of, getting to the bottom of things. So that really is what's going on here. There's a big theme of dialogue and discussion and the exchanging of ideas. It enters into themes of consciousness, spirituality, psychology, and it enters into a deeper consideration of who we are, why we're here, and those larger questions and considerations of discussion really help to open our minds, to break us free from assumptions. And, it's we all tend to think, or maybe not everybody, but it's common for people to think that we see things as they are, but we do not. And that's a very significant feature of psychology. We see things as we are conditioned, according to our nature, according to our knowledge, according to how we've been influenced even by, media, shall we say, or other people. And so we can get a little smug at worst with thinking we know. There's a wonderful saying, and I'll leave you with this final note, which is sort of a riddle that applies well to this Jupiter in Pisces, the sign of mysticism, where everything's not so linear anymore. The very fact that matter, it has no hardness to it at its core, is very Pisces mysticism. It goes like this: those who think they see reality as it is do not, and those who recognize that they do not see reality as it is, they see reality as it is. Okay, so if you think you're seeing reality as it is, you are mistaken. You are asleep. You are under the illusion of your lower mind, convinced by its conditioning. But if you awaken to realize that you do not see reality as it is, but as you are, then you see reality as it is, which opens you to be more humble, more open to communication, open to inquiring and checking in with others. How are you seeing it? What do you think? And it's not some bowl you over kind of power trip or some narcissistic position that you're taking anymore. Now you become humble and willing to become sort of vulnerable, shall we say, to the fact that what you know is valid and it may work, but let's not get carried away with conclusions about it. But that is a part of the game of life, part of the power play principle that we're all subject to in the arena of power on the world stage. There are those who, science says, well, which science are you talking about? Or, the gospel or some religious text says, well, there are other religious texts, aren't there? And, or the way I interpreted it, well, if you've ever been to an English class, for example, you'll realize that there's a lot of levels and angles of interpretation of anything. In fact, a fundamental precept of semantics is that there is no it. So if you, I, or anybody says to another, well, you don't get it, well, we don't get it because there is no it, which means there is no final absolute way to interpret anything. It's always left to the subjective perception angle. There are truths, there are realities, there are facts we can agree upon, but that's where, once again, even the facts lose their hardness from certain perspectives. All right, so that's where Pisces comes in. It undermines, in the most positive sense, the conviction of the fact-driven, hard principle, the matter-driven arguments, which do stand up in some arenas, like as with physics, for example. But what stands up firmly and strongly and defiantly in physics falls down quickly and disintegrates very quickly in the arena of quantum physics. which should be recognized as a branch, but a different category of physics. Sort of quantum physics may well be understood as a form of metaphysics. It's beyond the physical. So those are just some thoughts, though, and some thoughts for you to consider about Jupiter entering Pisces for 10 weeks, starting on the 13th of May and extending through till July 28th. I will at another time, just for the sake of brevity for now, keep it here, but I will come back with looking again, probably over the course of this 10-week period, in fact. I'll look at the ingress of Jupiter in Pisces in late December as well, so we'll get a wider angle perspective on the whole journey of Jupiter in Pisces. So thanks for being here today, and see you next time.